I have people. Yeah, it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Well, hey, we're here talking with Josh Horsley tonight, everybody, and this is Creators Corner. I'm really excited to have Josh here. This is your first time dropping into Creators Corner, be it live or watching after the fact. Creators Corner is the place where I go and have some great conversations, and we really go a little bit behind the meeple to meet the people. In this particular case, Josh, I want to stress, I think, some of the origin behind this conversation, because I saw your post via Facebook by a fantastic Facebook group, and I just was immediately taken by the game you were about to kickstart.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I really know visually it just grabbed my attention, so I immediately had to ask you on, and I'm just so glad that you're here. So thank you for taking time to join me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic to be here. And I love kind of just talking about games in general, helping people get to know me and talking a little bit more about my game. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here. Thanks, Chris.
Well, I'm glad to have you. So let's dig into this. Now, for me, I usually ask the question of my guest. The first question is your origin in board games. But instead of asking that, I want to get to that. I want to ask about your origin story behind this game. Where does the creation, and you could certainly share a little bit about this. I'm actually going to bring a screenshot up so people can kind of see what's happening here. But this game in particular, you can see here visually, this is what grabbed my attention. This game is Castlescape. And so tell everybody a little bit about this game and what made you come up with this idea.
Absolutely. So, Castlescape is a deck building area control game, which basically means you're going to start with a thin deck of cards. You're going to build that deck up over the course of the game, and you're going to kind of try and build it into an engine that will help you do something. In the case of this, it's an area control game, and specifically, you are trying to build a castle for the king. So all those little pieces you saw all over the board were wall pieces that are part of a magnificent castle that you're building for the king. So kind of where this game came from and some of the inspirations behind it. I grew up playing a lot of Age of Empires 2. It's an older video game that I played a lot in my young years. And my favorite strategy when I was playing that game was to build walls and castles and just like wall off large areas. And no board game I had ever played had that kind of feeling. And I really got into board games. We'll get into that in a minute, but a little bit when I was 15, 16 or so. And by the time I was early 20s, I really wanted this experience of building a castle wall. And I had played a lot of deck builders that are out there. And some of the ones that really caught my attention were like Clank, which had incorporated a board component as well. And more recently, Dominion, Imperium, which I think is behind me, or Dune Imperium, I'm sorry. Dune Imperium also does a fantastic job of incorporating a board and additional elements into the deck builder genre. And I really enjoyed how those games kind of pulled it all together. But really what kind of brought this all out was I played a fair amount of Dominion, which was kind of like the traditional deck builder or one of the first few. And what I always hated was that whenever you were buying cards that gave you points, they would go into your deck. They'd give you kind of a dead hand every time you drew them. They were just disappointing cards to draw. And I was like, you know what? I want to incorporate the board aspect where you're actually building something. It's not just cards that say estate or duchy or garden or whatever the case may be. I want to actually build a castle with this. So I took that experience and I tried to port it to the board. And anytime you drew a card where there was something that gave you points, instead I wanted that card to allow you to build walls so that you actually had to strategically think about how you were going to get those points, and you'll have a little bit of fun with the cards themselves. I also drew a lot of inspiration from Carcassonne as well, because you place the little meeples to kind of take over the cities, and you can try and outmaneuver your opponents with how you place your tiles around the game board and everything like that. And so I tried to combine the experiences of Dominion, Carcassonne, Clank, and Age of Empires 2 all into the same game, and this is kind of what I came up with.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of look at it, everybody here. I mean, this is kind of what drew my attention. There's a few things going on here, but all things I love. You mentioned Clank in particular, which is a favorite game of mine. Just started a game of the legacy version of that.
Very nice.
Liz, by the way, joining us, notes that Clank is what started her kind of love for deck building. And I agree with that. Clank is what started that. It was Clank in Space for me, actually. But
very nice.
I played it at a more local, I think it was in Connecticut. Con is what they called it. Yeah, a lot of influence there. And I expected Carcassonne. That did not surprise me. I kind of mentioned that before, but I love the Age of Empires reference. I'm a Civ guy myself, but I like Age of Empire.
I played a fair amount of Civ as well, but Age of Empires was my first love, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong. They're both great games. Well, let's talk about the origin then. So, you talk about doing this now, but what was the game that got you going? What was the game that made you excited about board games? Even if it wasn't maybe the one that drove you into modern, what's the game that you remember playing?
Absolutely. So basically, when I was a wee lad, let's say 5 or 6 years old, I would always ask my very first board game, I believe, was Monopoly. My dad taught me how to play. I know Monopoly, it's a terrible rap, but you know what? It gets a lot of people into board games. And so I played that with my dad when I was 5. He kind of had a few deals that I didn't really understand how much he was taking advantage of me in those deals. And instantly I was like, oh, this is how you play board games. You have to manipulate. You have to go. You have to outthink your opponent. Kind of went from there. Another friend of mine and I, when I was about 6, started playing a lot of Risk. Actually, Risk was another one of my favorite board games. And eventually, I graduated out of the whole Monopoly Risk stage into, when I was probably 12 or so, into Catan, which brought me into the more modern board game era, which for a lot of people, I think it did. So that was about the time it came out. And from there, I kind of rolled in. I got into war games a little bit, played a little bit of Axis and Allies. So I really like the kind of strategic thinking that you have to put behind those games. And I ultimately tried to roll a little bit of that into Castlescape as well, just because I like strategy. So that's kind of my little bit of origin story there.
Well, I'm going to just kick from your origin story. I just want to make a note because it's really important and special to me. You mentioned Monopoly. I agree. It gets a bad rap sometimes, but it is the origin for so many. I remember that as well. And my grandfather, we just celebrated his 90th birthday the other day, is the one who taught me Monopoly. And I don't have any desire to play Monopoly now, but it is at the heart of so many people's lives. So I always say it's important, and on this particular channel, I stress it. It's important just to celebrate the love of gaming and don't game shame almost, like you like Munchkins. Okay, great. I don't like Munchkins, or I don't like, I like Munchkins actually, but people will say that. So I always say, don't game shame. And Monopoly is one of the ones that people game shame a lot. But this one, you mentioned the Carcassonne inspiration, you mentioned kind of a video game inspiration, but talk about you from just you. Who are you? What do you do from a day-to-day, the job,
Sure.
Who is Josh?
Yeah. So, Josh, I am married to a beautiful woman named Savannah. We have a little dog named Betty, who's a Boston Terrier. I am a mechanical / software engineer for General Motors. I work on electric vehicles in my day-to-day job doing diagnostics. I have played video games most of my life. That's a big inspiration for a lot of my designs. I've got a whole suite of designs kind of in the works, and I pull a lot of inspiration from video games because I think a lot of us really enjoy both mediums, and it's really good. So between all of those things, it's just been a really, really kind of interesting origin here.
Does your background, I got to ask, does your background in engineering, how does that play into the design mind? Because I think about sometimes when I've talked to people who do engineering of any kind, there's a lot of different kind of facets of engineering careers, but it seems like their brain functions in just a very effective way for design.
From time to time, yes. Other times it can really get in your way because you really want to solve a problem and you just like, this should work. I know it has to work. And you spend hours staring at something that has a really simple solution. But yeah, usually I have a mathematic mind. So I can take an Excel spreadsheet and I can plot out the values of a card and what it should be, probably easier than some people who are more artistically or just mechanically influenced. Sure. I think it takes a lot of effort from multiple different avenues, multiple different people, and I think everyone brings something to the table. But yeah, my brain does think very much like, all right, if I do this, then we can do this. Otherwise, we can do this. I kind of have that programmatic. If you're familiar with like if then else statements in programming, I kind of do take that approach to a lot of my designs.
I am in social and general just marketing, and that's the same kind of thing we do with social listening. It's the if then or kind of
Hmm.
statements, and I use the same kind of thought process. So I appreciate that.
Hmm.
You know, what fascinates me too with this one is this is technically your first Kickstarter then that you have out. What has that experience been like? I talked to a lot of people about how to prepare for a Kickstarter, who've been doing this. Everyone from Jamie Stegmaier has been doing this a long time too. Some people have only done one or two. What's the first one been like? What has been kind of the experience thus far?
Crazy. So the amount of work that you do leading up to a Kickstarter, I always thought, you know what, I'm an engineer. I'll figure this out. It'll be fine. It is so much work leading up to it. I give props to everyone who does a Kickstarter because especially like if it ends up funding because it is so much work trying to build an audience, maintain their attention, and like actually provide them good content at the same time you're building out the game, you're play testing, you're doing all of these different things. It's really a big thing to build up to. As far as the actual launch, I have to say I sat there and hit the refresh button every 15 seconds for about 2 hours. It was very painful to try and walk away from my computer to just see how we were doing. And every time, since yeah, we are live right now, so every time we get a sale, it's like, oh, got another one, woo! So it's really exciting. But there are definitely ups and downs with it as well. When you don't get any sales for like 6 hours, it's like, okay, what are we doing wrong? Do I need to say something? Do I need to post something? What do I need to do to generate some excitement? And you just kind of go from there. So definitely highs and lows in this whole process, but it's been really fun. And my wife and I are already thinking, how can we do our next one?
Well, and you have funded at this point, so
Yes.
that's my understanding. So how do you go about that? How did you go about that process being the first one to figure out this is our funding goal? Because I've seen plenty of people who on their first Kickstarter don't succeed, often because they set a goal that was just unrealistic. Other times because, quite frankly, the product wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
You obviously have managed that process well. So how did you go about figuring that out and maybe coming to that right number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is something that I struggled with a lot. And oh, thank you so much, Brooks. I really appreciate that. So yeah, that's a very good question because there are a ton of things that lead into that. And basically, what we kind of came to is we put some money into this game up front to kind of start developing art, to do some advertising. I've gone to conventions and kind of repped my game to a few publishers. I've tried pitching it as a design for other publishers to pick up, all these different things. It all eventually led to going to Kickstarter here. And what we ended up determining is we just want my funding goal was ultimately set at the amount of money, the break even point where I can print the game and finish the art and get it to a fulfillment center so that we can start shipping it to backers. So whatever that ends up being for you, for me, since I have a deck builder, there's a lot of art. Art is expensive, and you have to be able to fund that. So we set the goal for our campaign at $20,000 because for us to print a reasonable amount of games at a cost that isn't outrageous. For instance, if I went, we looked at many different manufacturers, but you can print as low as like 300 units at certain manufacturers, but they'll charge you 20 or 25 bucks per game. Plus, I have a mini in my game, which also adds to like molding costs and stuff like that. So all of those factors kind of lead into it. And it's like, all right, we need to set this at a reasonable goal that if it doesn't fund, we're not going to be heartbroken. But if it does fund, great, we'll actually be able to get this out to people and we won't impoverish ourselves in the process. Because certain designers that I've talked to, they're like, yeah, I actually need like $15,000 to do my campaign, but my goal is like $6,000. And it's like, okay, you can do that, and you might get that whole we funded in 4 hours thing, and it's great, and you can go forward with that. But if somewhere along the way you lose a lot of momentum and you don't reach your actual amount of money that you need, you're putting a lot of your own money into the project, which some people are totally fine doing. But we just wanted to make sure that financially we were being responsible with the product, because we want to turn this into something where we can release more games. So that's just kind of how we approached the topic itself.
Yeah, I as I've talked to many people, I think it might have been Frank West who said to me, and if I'm misquoting that, I apologize to Frank, but it really goes down to the fact that a lot of people lose money on these initial Kickstarters, and it's challenging. There's a joy part in putting the game out, obviously, and in your particular case, I think again, you got the visual appeal. So let's talk about the look and feel of this from a design perspective. You've got the deck building component, which I love and I want to talk about too. But visually, what I'm seeing on the table, how important was it to make something that just looked cool and grabbed that attention? I like to say that gets that kind of convention eye, that where you're walking by the table, it's like, oh, wait a minute, what's that? I want to see that.
Yeah, no, that was really important. So I started honestly with this game. I started with little 8mm wooden cubes that were just set on like different colored tiles all over the game board. And I was like, this just looks like nothing. And I a couple of years ago was fortunate enough to get a 3D printer for Christmas. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to design a fun little 3D wall piece. I really liked what I came up with. And I decided to print 100 of them for the game. And then I just kind of went from there and realized you could make the little battlements on top of the wall, and the wooden cubes that represent your guild's influence, the recruits. Yes, those, they can fit perfectly inside the little top of the wall pieces. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And since then, I've kind of taken this approach for a lot of my designs where I really want a solid table presence, because it really does catch that convention eye, or people just glancing through pictures. They're like, oh, this looks different, almost exactly like what you told me caught your eye. So like, oh, this is different than what I've seen before. And I really wanted to kind of capture that experience, and also kind of have people have a fun time playing it while they're at it, which is where the deck building comes in as well.
So let's talk about deck building. You liked Clank, so naturally the draw of deck building is something you like. Do you like this, just for you personally, do you enjoy the straight up deck building, or do you really enjoy, because you mentioned it, kind of that mix? You know, you mentioned Dominion, which obviously all deck building, right? But where do you preference, and how do you take deck building and combine it well? Because there are games that do it really well. There's others that don't. I think, for example, Arnic, which I'm a big fan of right now, it does it really well. Clank in Space, they do it really well. But not every game does that well. So you take some lessons from the ones that do, I imagine.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, I started with Dominion, and I think Dominion's just a solid deck builder kind of base game that has a lot of expansions, a lot of fun things that they kind of experimented with. And they really tried to, and from there, I really tried to expand. So yeah, Clank, I really liked how they incorporated the board. So you're actually doing something with the cards on the game board itself. I also, Dune Imperium is a worker placement deck builder where you also have resources that you collect. You commit people to battles. You do all these really cool different things with your cards, and they present new options. And I really wanted to play on that deck builder plus, that deck builder and more thing, because I think there are a lot of deck builders out there. And actually, right now, there's a number of games coming out that are deck builder plus something else, because deck builder is it's a great engine to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do with just a worker placement game. It kind of adds that slightly more difficult, more strategic element to the game. And a lot of people already like the genre. And then you can take another interesting idea, add it on top of it, and mix it together to really make it kind of a streamlined process that takes two things that people might already inherently understand and create a whole new experience from it.
Yeah, and I think for me, the reason why the blend itself works is just the fact that you can only have so many pure deck builders.
Yes.
Or living card games. I know anyone who watches the channel will know I love Marvel Champions. I could live and play Marvel Champions all day long, but I don't want necessarily 5 more living card games. I got 1 or 2 is enough. It's to keep up with. So I think this was a natural progression in the industry. Did you, as you did kind of your process of building the game, what kind of research did you conduct, be it play testing, be it just playing other games? How would you kind of describe that process of making sure, this is something that's ready to go? That feeling good about this is going to succeed, I imagine, plays a part in being ready to hit let's officially kickstart this.
Yeah, so I have, just to give you an idea, I've performed probably close to 200 play tests at this point, and those are actual, let's call them governed play tests, if you will. Basically, where I'm sitting there watching other people play, or they're doing blind play tests. There's a number of other play tests where my play testers, who have access to my tabletop simulator mod, have played with their friends, and they've provided feedback beyond that. So it's the real number is well above 200, and that doesn't account for all of the hours I sat in front of the computer, looked at spreadsheets, tried to figure out stuff myself, moved cards around, moved walls around myself, and played the whole game. But so 200 play tests at least, and really deck builders kind of need that sort of thing. But I did also play a lot of other games. So yeah, Dominion. I'm a pretty big fan of Star Realms. I played the phone game quite a bit. I have to say, probably a few hundred games at the very least, and that just has fun combos. It's a really solid, simple, straightforward deck builder that I really like. I think I've played a little bit of Ascension. I've played a lot of Clank, lately Dune Imperium, and I also had another deck builder plus game that give a little shout out here. Some other guys are designing, and they've actually been really helpful on my design as well. They're designing a game called Gangs of Callisto, and it's a deck builder mafia mob based thing where they're fighting over each other's turfs. And so I kind of like, we have played off of each other a little bit. We did blind play test swaps for each other, and so you can kind of connect with a lot of designers throughout this whole thing and get a lot of feedback from other designers. One other thing I'll mention, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's called Protospiel. It's basically an event where dozens to hundreds of designers will all get in the same room together, pull out their designs, and they'll just kind of like go around the table. All right, time for your game. All right, time for your game. Time for your game. And you just sit around the table, you play the game, and you rip it to shreds at the end, and then you build it back up. So it's like, really didn't like this, and this, Josh. Your game, these parts were trash, but this was awesome. You should focus on that.
Real feedback.
Yes,
and
real
that's
feedback.
an event that's been mentioned before, but that real feedback, I got to ask, how important do you think it is for designers then, with what you're talking about, to have thick skin? I mean,
impossibly.
It seems critical.
Impossibly important. Through this whole process, my skin was a little bit thinner at the start, but I've always considered myself pretty thick skin. I really learned what it was when somebody at my first Protospiel event was like, I really like this part of your game, but I'm going to use a word I never use to describe this part of your game. And it's that I hate this part. Like, I hate it. It's terrible. You need to completely rework it. And it's like, oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. But you know what? That single piece of advice from that guy, I was able to look past the whole, I hate this part of your game, take his advice and actually reworked that entire system. It was the market system, the old market system in Castlescape. And I reworked it into something that I'm really happy with now and is way cleaner, way faster. It is so vitally important to be able to take that kind of thick skin thing and just go with it, because it will really help your designs if you aren't just getting feedback from your mom. I love my mother, but she will always support me, and she will never tell me it's something she doesn't like. Or my friends. My friends will be like, "Oh yeah, this is great. This is great."
I don't have that problem. My friends will tell me if they don't. But
Well, that's those are good friends to have as
yeah,
well.
it's true. But again, I think the big thing here is that you take feedback. The difference, a potential difference between long-term success and failure is the fact that you're able to take something and say, okay, this didn't work. I'm gonna fix it. Plus, I always point out some of the best designers I've met of all levels and experiences in the industry are the ones who are willing to say, yeah, we fixed this. It didn't work. And I couldn't see it because I'm so attached to the project. It's like writing copy over and over. You're going to miss the fact that you put two T's in something, or
Yep. Can't see
which
the
is,
forest for the trees. Yeah.
yeah. It's really interesting to hear that, though. And again, that's not the first time that event's been mentioned. I do want to point out you may have sold someone. Brooks points out that had on Dune, and so they meant to pull the trigger. So you may have sold someone on not just your game. You definitely got a few people going to your game tonight, but you also sent some people over to Dune.
Well, thank you, and I hope you like Dune. I really like that game, so it's quite fun.
It is on my shelf of opportunity at the moment,
Very
but
nice.
it will get played. As I said, the Clank. I love these type of games, so the Clank Legacy one's been on mine playing list, and that's taken attention. Let me ask you before I get to one of my final questions.
Mhm.
For you, can you talk about the board game community a little bit? Because I've seen you out, you've talked with a lot of people in the Board Game Revolution Facebook group in particular. I believe it is where I think I connected with you.
Mhm.
You're out there, you're connecting with people, you're talking to them. How important is this community, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or wherever it might be? How have they been, and what role have they played in this process for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually plugged in with a few really good Facebook groups pretty early on, probably 3.5 years ago. I'll give a small shout out to Board Game Design Lab. It's run by Gabe Barrett. It's basically a group of about 9,000 designers that all have their own designs. They're all kind of mixing ideas together, bouncing ideas off each other. And I built a pretty solid core group there. And then, kind of, once I had a bit better of a game, I started going out to the board game group and Board Game Revolution primarily, and kind of trying to interact with people, get their thoughts on the game, try to engage them. And I think it's extremely important because a lot of my day one backers, which are a huge part of how you successfully fund on Kickstarter, is you need a pretty good day one turnout. A lot of them came from people who I engaged with. I've helped them on their designs, or they've taken a look at mine. They've play tested mine. They've done all of these different things, and I think it's really cool that those communities exist and that we can kind of share what we're making as we're making it, and take their feedback. Like, a lot of times, what I really like to do is I like to say, "Hey, I've got two or three directions I could go here. What do you think of this? And what do you think of those directions? Tell me, do you like A, B, or C?" And that does two things. One, it gets people interested in the project. And two, it gives me really valuable feedback that, okay, option A, just people don't like it. Like, I've got 35 votes for B and 10 votes for C and one vote for A. I guess I should probably look heavily at B, even though A might have been my favorite thing. And so I think it's really important to do that, especially as you're developing art, especially as you're developing the layout of your cards, the design. You don't have to take every bit of feedback, and to be perfectly honest, you actually can't, because there are conflicting pieces of feedback. But it really helps you get a sense of what other people think of your project, how you can kind of mold it. And a lot of people that backed me on day one have been watching my project unfold on Facebook over the past 3 years. And they're just like, I love what you've done with the game. I love how it ended up. This is so cool. And it's really encouraging for me. And I'm really happy to be that person that kind of can talk to people, can help people with their designs as well, because I want to see more good games come into the world here. And it's just exciting that they're willing to do that for me as well.
I'm going to take a moment here, because one thing that I always find interesting, and just give me a moment where I try to do this, because I got to move something to a second screen. But I would like to share your Kickstarter screen, because one thing that I haven't talked a lot about with people on this show in particular is the importance of the design of the page. And one thing that drew my attention when I did this, and I just want to point this out for folks who think about this, is going through, and even a simple thing as you could see, like this moving image, right, of watching the pieces drop into play. What kind of thoughts and advice do you give to people looking to do a Kickstarter? Because for me, one of the things that jumps out is designing a good page. And you certainly, to me, have done that.
Thank you.
The interface, but what advice do you give? It might not be the page design. I just really wanted to point that out because I really love that GIF.
Well, thank you. I was very excited to get that GIF. I actually got that. So I hired a videographer named George Georgiadis, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, from Oniro. And he did an excellent job with our video. I loved it. And he also did some GIFs. And I really think that in order to have a successful Kickstarter, you need two things. You do need to build that day one audience, those people that are your if you've ever talked to, I'm not sure if you've talked to Andrew Lowen from Next Level Web or anything, but he is an excellent resource in the board game community for how to build that day one audience. And he says to build raving fans. So what I really tried to do is I tried to build that day one audience, those raving fans that would come on day one, they'd leave comments, they'd be excited for the game. We'd be like excited to go and get this funded. But the second thing I really tried to do, and I was fortunate enough to find a great designer who really helped me lay out that page. But I tried to make it exciting, explain the whole game, and I tried to get advice from as many people as I could when I was designing that page. So I shared my links as I was designing it. I got feedback from other people. All right, on the first few days, you might want to keep your stretch goals lower until you've actually funded, because it's not important information at that time. But once you've funded, move them up your page, for instance. So you can, there's a lot of like little tips and tricks as you're building your campaign that can really go into that. And I'd love to help people with their designs if they ever want to reach out to me. I'm happy to kind of talk through that and share my experiences. But I do really think a flashy page with a few GIFs, with some nice layout, with clearly presented information is really important to allow people who aren't part of your raving fans to want to back the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And again, I do think the pages, I have seen the pages that don't get my attention are the ones that I don't want to stay on. But you hit on something I think that's critical, which is clear information. I need to be able to find, am I going to like this game? Okay, what are the components basically going to be in it? What is the core game? And you got to hit the nail on the head. I will say, if anyone does have questions at this time, certainly please feel free to drop them before I say goodbye to Josh. I'm happy to try and work one or two in from those of you who are here. Thank you for all the comments tonight. The comment section is very full. It looks like we definitely have not interest just in your game, but now you've driven people to Star Realm, Dune Imperium. So we're giving some love around the world, around the world of gaming here. Let me ask you, just as a closing kind of question for you, just in case no other questions do come in. When it comes down to it, if someone wants to create a game, they want to design a game, they want to enter this world, what do you tell them? What do you say is that piece of advice to hopefully kind of get them going?
Sure. So what I always tell at least a new designer is just take your ideas. You can have 1,000 ideas, but if you never write them down or get them down on paper, they aren't worth anything. So when you have an idea, write it down. Take a pencil and a piece of paper and start drawing cards if you want to do cards. I would say probably don't do a deck builder first. I did. It was a huge challenge. It's been 4.5 years on this journey for me to develop this game as my first game, first official game here being published. But it is difficult, but if you're in for a long challenge, go for it. I'm not going to stand in your way. But
you just said, by the way, I want to point it out before you
yeah,
continue, and I just hope everyone hears it. 4.5 years. I mean, I always stress this when anyone's on. None of these things just exist in a vacuum and suddenly like exist. Period. It takes time, and I just think that's always so critical. So please continue, but I just had to hit hard on that because I think
yeah.
it's really important for people to hear the time frames that some of these things take.
Yeah, and I mean, going forward, I should hopefully be able to speed up that time frame for future designs. But a lot of that was spent learning. So I did start by I drew some pictures in PowerPoint and I printed them out and I started messing around with pennies and little wooden cubes on the thing. I drew cards by hand, and it all kind of. Eventually, you reach a point where you're like, all right, I can start making more serious prototypes with this. But it doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to have art. One of the biggest things that potential designers kind of struggle with is they're like, well, but I've got to get art. How do I get art? And it's like, you don't actually need art to start designing games. You can design them purely with words on paper. And yes, once you reach a certain point, maybe you should look at putting placeholder art in there, like clips from Google or something like that. But don't waste your time on something that will probably change by the time you get to the end of it. But really just stick with it. There's an amazing community, like I said, on Board Game Design Lab. I have found a ton of people there. It is an amazing community for designers. I know there's some threads on Reddit that I follow and occasionally post in. And it's just really, the community for board games is extremely encouraging. We all, I believe, I was on another podcast recently, and the word that the host used was co-opetition, where it's basically like we're all cooperating, and it's a competition sort of, but the love of games begets more games. Like I'm not telling you can only buy Castlescape. It's the only deck builder area control game you should ever play. I'm saying go play Dune Imperium as well because it's an awesome game. So I really just love this community and love the opportunity that being a part of it is.
Before I let you go, I do have one question. I'm going to bring one question from the audience that came in that I think is really interesting. Curious, what's the process of developing a deck builder specifically? I feel like synergy and balancing is probably a real challenge.
Yeah, so it is a huge challenge. So specifically designing a deck builder, that's most of the reason that I took 4.5 years to make this game. If I didn't choose a deck builder, I probably could have made it in 2 or less. Basically, it requires a lot more playtesting. You spend a lot of time in front of an Excel spreadsheet. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time in front of an Excel spreadsheet, playing around with numbers, trying to get things that balance, trying to make sure that none of your card effects can create infinite loops that break your game. You might spend a whole game trying to test a particular card because that card only comes up 5 or 6 times during a whole course of a game, and you need to make sure that it doesn't break your game in a specific way. And what I would say if you're looking at designing a deck builder is take it in bite-sized pieces. So when I initially started, I designed something like 180 or 190 cards, like unique cards, I should say. That's not even counting duplicates in the deck. My final count here is 169 cards, including duplicates, starter deck, and like standard cards and everything in Castlescape now. So I had to trim that. I think it was from 180 all the way down to about 75 unique cards. Because I went overboard, and you get kind of into information overload. It's like, all right, I've got all these 180 different interactions from all these different cards. I need to test all of these somehow. So I would say take it in bite-sized pieces, and you will probably be a lot more successful than I was at the beginning of my designing career here.
Well, thank you for taking that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. We had a great audience for this one, so appreciate you joining live. For those who are watching later on, certainly feel free to kind of ask your questions. I'll try to bring them back to Josh. Of course, I'm going to recommend everyone goes over to Kickstarter and certainly takes a look at this one if it's still running at the time, but you're watching it. There is a link in the description. I'll probably add some other links in there, so take a look at that. And Josh, where can is there any spot, anything else you want to get out or send places you want to send people to in particular? Board Game Geek, anything else?
Yeah, if you want to take a look at the game, it is on Board Game Geek. I also have an email sign up list that I can give Chris for the description of the video after. But yeah, if you're interested and want to take a look at the game on Castlescape or Castlescape on Kickstarter, that would be awesome. And I really think you'll like it. It's a pretty strategic game. There's a little bit of competition, and so if you don't like any competition in your games, maybe it's not the perfect game for you. But
co-op.
Yeah,
that's what I say.
exactly. But yeah, so I encourage you to check it out. But thank you very much for having me on the show tonight, Chris, and thank you for your time.
Oh no, my pleasure. And just for everyone tuning in on the live side, if you're wondering what is coming up, I got some great people coming up. I want to make sure I highlight them. We've got Joseph Chen is going to be coming on the show. Katea, I don't want to. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Katea Howitson is going to be coming on, and we're also going to have Danielle DeLay and Nathan Thornton from Storm Chaser Games coming on. These are all coming up within literally the next 10 days. So
wow,
take a look at the
awesome.
channel. Some really great people. In particular, Katia, I was doing she's got a Kickstarter right now, but I want to mention, which is really awesome, which is a calendar of the art she made from meeples and board game pieces. It's just so cool, and it's definitely worth taking a look at. So with that said, please take a look at the YouTube channel. So like and subscribe if you like what you're seeing. A lot more Creators Corner coming. This is my real focus. I'm going to have more favorite series and other stuff coming, but Creators Corner is the heavy focus for me. And I'm hoping to get a lot more great people on who I have not named in that upcoming list. So with that said, Josh, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
In the audience, thank you for tuning in live, and I will catch you all next week. The next one is on Wednesday night at 8:30. So I'll see you then.